Ya son 9 años de la ausencia de Carl Sagan, un astrónomo, divulgador que marcó a muchas generaciones desde la década de 1980. El pasado 12 de diciembre, vía telefónica, tuve la oportunidad en un proyecto conjunto de Radio Cosmos y Astro TV de entrevistar a Anne Druyan, quien fuera la compañera de Carl Sagan los últimos años de su vida. Tenemos esta primicia para ustedes en lo que es posiblemente la primera entrevista que se tiene para Anne Druyan en la República Mexicana.
What happened and marked Carl in his life path so he wanted to dedicate to astronomy?
Oh, that's a very deep question.
Yeah.
Well, it began in childhood. At a very young age, he lived in Brooklyn, near the water,
Yeah.
and in the distance he could see the twinkling lights of Manhattan. And he could see the stars on the boardwalk along the water at night, and he asked his father and mother very innocently, what are those lights in the sky? And his parents said, well, they're stars.
Yeah.
And of course, Carl was a person of very deep curiosity, and so that answer was not sufficient. He wanted to know what the stars really were. And of course, his parents could only answer with their lights in the sky, which was, in a way, going back to his original question. So he decided at that moment that he would find out
Yeah.
what the stars really were. And luckily for him and for the world and for me, his parents took him to the library to find a deeper answer to his question. And I think if there's one thing that a parent can do for a child that's very important, besides giving them complete, unquestioning, uncritical love, is the fostering of curiosity, the encouragement of curiosity, the ability to say, I don't know, let's go find out. And of course, those steps to the library were among the first steps in Carl's journey to becoming who he became.
Yeah. Oh, wait. The second question is, in which moment Carl take conscience of the importance of science divulgation, science outreach?
I can't tell you a particular moment, but I do know
Yeah.
that Carl was born to parents who had, very little. His grandparents and his parents were living just getting along. Every month was a struggle for the rent. And so he didn't have any scientists in his life, personally, in his personal experience. And he grew up at a very progressive moment in American history, unlike this current moment,
Yeah.
when the notion that you should try to create a world in which education was available to everyone, absolutely everyone. And so that was a big influence on him, the cultural influence, the dream that he knew what it was like to search and not to be able to get the answers. And he wanted to create a world where the revelations of science
Yeah.
would naturally be the birthright of every single person. So I think his passion for that comes from both the zeitgeist in which he came of age and also the values that he held in his heart.
I see. What was the most difficult thing he and you found to try to share and teach science to all the people?
Well, I think the most difficult thing is that we live in a society which is a little bit afraid of science, maybe more than a little bit afraid. And also because science very often collides
Yeah.
with traditional religious belief.
Yes. That's right.
And so what we have is a tragically compartmentalized civilization in which what we know to be true because our cell phones work and our iPods and our computers. And the fact is that we get, we go out to the outer solar system to look at other worlds, and we come back with very convincing imagery and data of the nature of these worlds. And of course, nothing could have made that possible but science. So we carry a certain kind of science in our heads, to the extent that any of us know any science. Very few of us do. But we carry some science in our heads, but what we carry in our hearts is completely different. It's a pre-scientific notion, which is a result of received traditional religious belief.
Yeah.
And because it has, by nature, it's at odds with much of science, that is one of the single biggest problems. You would think that a society that understood that its economy and its entire civilization was dependent on science and high technology would want as many people in the society, especially one that aspires to be democratic, to know as much about science as possible, but it's not true. In fact, science education is inadequate, and wherever it contradicts with these ancient religious ideas, very often science will lose. And that's a serious problem. I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks, because if there wasn't that anti-scientific religious bias, I think that science education would be a number one priority of every single industrialized country. But of course that's not the case, especially in the United States.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now the next question is, in the last months of Carl's life, what was his greatest worry about the future of the human race?
He was very concerned about inadvertent climate modification through the buildup of greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he had written his PhD thesis as a very, very young man on the greenhouse effect on the planet Venus.
Yeah.
And so he was more painfully aware than most people about the dangers of inadvertent climate modification. And for a long time he was criticized really brutally by the press for making what they said for scaring people about climate change. And I think those same people would not make those charges today. He was afraid that we would lose the tiny bit of democracy that we have here because of scientific and mathematical and engineering illiteracy, that the great decisions that have to be made in a democracy by informed citizens, that we as a society would be incapable of making them astutely because our science education was so inadequate. And he was afraid, of course, of the possibility that nuclear weapons would fall into the hands of terrorists. Remember, he died before 9/11, which is a kind of watershed for people in the United States, if not elsewhere. And so he worked very hard against proliferation. He was very concerned about the lack of actual compliance on the part of Russia and the United States in terms of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And he was afraid that it would come back and bite us one day. And as in these things and other matters, he proved to be capable of seeing into the future, not supernaturally, but just based on the existing conditions at the time of the last days of his life.
Yeah. Which of his life goals did he consider his greatest achievement?
I'm not sure, because he was not one to speak of his own achievements. He was a very modest person, beautifully modest, very soulful human being, who was really more interested in what would happen next than in any of his achievements. He was very proud of his work in the in the first 4 decades of the space age. All of his work on every single mission of exploration that NASA mounted in the first 40 years of the space age. He would have been proud of that. He would have been very proud of his work on Venus, being the first person to accurately know the temperature of Venus and other aspects of Venus's atmosphere. I'm sure he was proud of his astonishing, unparalleled effort at public science education. Yeah. That meant a lot to him. I think he would have been proud, or was proud, although I'm this is my guess. This is not something that he himself said. I think he would have been he was very proud of being arrested in a nonviolent civil disobedience demonstration at the Nevada nuclear test site when the United States continued underground testing some 18 months after the then Soviet unilateral moratorium.
Yeah.
You know, he was the happiest person I ever knew. I think he was very proud of our relationship and how over the 19 years, almost 20 years that we were together, we managed to sustain such a high level of interest, concern, and joy about being together. And I think he was proud of a lot of things. You know, he had a lot of things to be proud of. He was this was a man who when there would be a naturalization ceremony for new citizens of the United States in Ithaca, yeah, he would go and speak to the new citizens, pleading with them to question absolutely everything that their government told them, saying that was the most important responsibility a citizen had. He was the kind of person who would, just of his own volition, not with no press, no reward in mind at all, would go and on the day before the first day of school for the public schools locally, would go to inspire the local teachers with the sacred nature of what they were about to do, to get them excited about the new year. He was just truly a good person, is I guess the best way I can describe him.
Yeah, impressive. Now, in your opinion, which are the greatest tasks and challenges for the third world countries in fighting people's ignorance of science and technology?
Well, the answer to your question is inside your question. The greatest challenge is explicitly to fight ignorance of science and technology and history too. Yeah. To me, knowledge is education is the single most liberating force in human life. And when I think of the great stories of liberation, of people who have been enslaved, of people who have been treated as something less than human because they were female or because they were racially different from the dominating power, when I think of that, I always think that it's the power of education, of knowledge, that sets people free. And so I guess the biggest struggle is to find a way to finance a massive act of inspired public education. I mean, it's not just enough to throw money at it. It can't, because if it's boring, it will only attract those who are already inclined to be interested, and those are not the people that we're going after here. We want to go after everybody, and we want to light a spark inside the minds and the hearts of people, so that not only do they intellectually understand that the Earth is that tiny pale blue dot that Carl was responsible for the Voyager spacecraft taking an image of out by the orbit of Pluto. To me, if we could internalize the notion, the image of the pale blue dot, we would have a much better chance of valuing the preciousness and rarity of life on Earth. We would see ourselves as a unity and not as competitors. And we would get, at long last, we would get to work on the business of making this a planet where nobody goes to bed hungry. That would be, that's the great dream, not of every spiritual quest, not just the religious ones, but the scientific ones also. The notion of illuminating the planet and making it a better place to live so that there's a minimum standard of living that absolutely everyone can have. And there's no reason in a time of agricultural science and industrial science of the type that we have now that shouldn't be the case.
Now, in your opinion, and also Carl's opinion, what can we do, the common person, for the divulgation, for the people outreach of science?
Well, we can try to be as alert as possible to the need for that, and to the extent that we, for those of us who do have elected officials that we can complain to, we have to do that. We have to do that. We have to reject the stuff that doesn't advance this notion. And we have to reject the purely consumerist society for a society of consciousness where we awaken to the 400 billion suns in the cosmos, in the Milky Way galaxy alone, let alone the number of galaxies in the cosmos. You see, this is the problem with our traditional myths and our traditional perspective. It is so geocentric. We are, as a civilization, largely a bunch of unreconstructed pre-Copernicans. We have to take the great Copernican insight to heart, and with all its implications, that we are not possibly the only children of our imagined creator, but in fact, we probably share this Milky Way galaxy and perhaps the cosmos itself with many other intelligent beings. That hasn't been demonstrated yet. I'm the first to admit it. But the likelihood is good that there are other worlds with life on them. And if we began to see this world as a kind of unity, then instead of as a hopelessly divided place of such horrible violence, it would change things. And I guess as parents, for those of us who have children, that's one of the things that have to start very early on. We have to begin to instill in our children this beautiful view of a Earth and a solar system and a universe far older than our wildest imaginings, far older than our ancestors ever dreamed. And we have to instill that so that we are not instilling a kind of geocentric notion in our children's minds that human beings, and maybe even particularly just our type of human beings, are the center of the universe. We have to decentralize ourselves, I think. And then we'll become more interested. I mean, after all, it's not surprising that people aren't interested in the rest of nature when they think that it really just consists of us. It's a kind of cultural narcissism which we're up against. But I think we're ready to outgrow that vision of the Earth as the center of the universe and begin to see the way things really are.
I understand that in the last years, you and Carl had the project to do another Cosmos series, but in this case, focused to to children. What about that project?
Yes, we did have that project, and it's one of the many sad things about Carl's untimely death.
Yeah.
That we weren't able to complete that project, and I have to say that emotionally, that I'm not ruling out ever doing that. Right now, I've got my hands full with a bunch of projects, but maybe someday I'll be ready to do that again. At this moment, it still makes me a little sad. I am, on the other hand, working on a variety of schools. One has just opened in Florida. It's the Carl Sagan Academy. And we are working on perfecting what could be called a humanist curriculum, which with emphasis on math and science and critical thinking. This first school that we've opened in Hillsborough County, Florida, is in one of the most underserved communities in the United States. And we are very lucky to be implementing some of those ideas that come from ideas that Carl and I had together and had hoped to incorporate into our version of Cosmos for Kids.
Well, let me tell you that it's a big emotion to speak with you, to hear you. Carl was our teacher.
Yeah.
And we remember every day we have here the observatory Carl Sagan.
Yes.
And in fact, last Friday we dedicate a mural in order to join the best expression of human beings, science and art. And I would like really to acknowledge you to continue that inspiration because we are in times that we need a lot of inspiration, mainly for children.
I completely agree with you, Antonio. It's my pleasure to talk with you. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope we speak again soon.
Sure, and I acknowledge in the name of Radio Cosmos from Monterrey and Astro TV, those are two efforts precisely to give science to people, to everybody, using the internet, and we hope that will help to the purposes of Carl.
I hope so too.
Thank you, Anne. And
thank you, Antonio. Pleasure's mine, really. And very happy New Year to you.
Okay, very happy New Year.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Queda así esta constancia de la vivencia de Andrin con Carl Sagan y una visión muy interesante, muy profunda sobre la ciencia y la educación en el mundo actual. Queda para la reflexión. Nuestro agradecimiento a Lourdes Kawish, quien tramitó la entrevista, también a Omar Ali López Herrera, quien realizó la versión estenográfica y traducción al español, y Miguel Ángel Franco Tanguma, quien hizo la producción de este programa especial. Gracias por parte de Radio Cosmos y Astro TV.